would you define, like, are those check cashing operations, what are they? And would you say that almost all of them are, do any of them have good business practices that we can say?
Thank you.
Sure, can you hear me? AFS, Alternative Financial Services, come in a number of shapes and forms, and I, despite the fact that I work exclusively with banks to be smart in these areas, I don't carry a strong bias against them. I think the AFS enterprise is something that's needed in the service and shoring up what banks aren't doing today. Some of the strongest performers are supermarkets who are aggressively getting into the financial services realm, some unscrupulously, others very effectively, and the prepaid providers as well. But I would include pawn shops, I would include liquor stores, I would include hybrid organizations that do transactional cash service, cashing services, and a number of lenders. I think one of the interesting points in the Pew data was that for AFS users, the level of trust for a supermarket equaled that for a bank. Where do you trust more with your money, a supermarket or Bank of America? Same number.
What happens with Bank of America is in the supermarket. It's like a blurring of lines because more and more banks are having small banks and bankettes, small banks in the supermarket itself. So the convenience is resolved or collected together. So you have a bank in the supermarket. When you talk about supermarket, are you talking about cash your check at the checkout counter or in the bank is in the supermarket?
Sure, there's both. Banks have in-store branches that are in supermarkets. I would consider that a bank. But also, supermarkets, particularly independent Latino providers, are partnering strategically and very well with a number of smaller, light infrastructure financial service providers around phone cards and international services, and well, basic transactional services. And I think it runs the gamut, and I don't want to generalize, from really good and responsible all the way to usurious. But they exist absolutely, and understand that a hardworking family in a low-income community has very limited trips outside their home and employer to do anything, and they like the idea of catching up the supermarket.
And I think, just to add on Daniel's point, is that we don't want to lump all the AFS providers in a negative category. I mean, we think this is an opportunity to innovate, and so while we know that for older adults there is an affinity for banks and credit unions, I think that prepaid is a great example of looking at an alternative and where we want to ensure that there are consumer protections and that there are features that have savings components and that are positive. So we want to replicate some of the positive aspects of maybe a checking or savings account for people who already have that trust. Because it's easier to bring that to the trusted provider than to take people's trust and move them to another institution in some cases.
Hi, Sarah Brennan from Councilmember of the Alarcon's office. My question, I think, is more for Daniel. I'm curious because in Vivian's presentation, she found that the #1 reason why people don't use banks for moving across the country is because of trust. But then I noticed in the Pew Charitable Trust study on page 9, it says that for both banks and unbanked, a much higher percentage give the #1 reason is location. So I was wondering if you could talk about that and why you think the difference is.
Sure, I can give it a shot. I think that, well, first of all, there's certainly different sample sets. So the ARP data set is a national set, so it's talking to a different breadth of people, whereas in Los Angeles, this Pew study was specifically for Los Angeles. When we looked at trust, it actually scored middle to low. I think people were trusting and accepting of what they use, be it AFS or be it banking. And I think there's different drivers to why somebody becomes banked or unbanked, like your form of payment, potentially your education. Once you are banked or unbanked, I think the primary driver as to where you bank or where you transact is location. So there's one decision point that says, I think I'm going to become banked or unbanked. That might be the form of payment of your income or a variety of factors. Once you're in one of those two camps, location by far drives your selection of who you actually use, more so than almost anything else. Fees can be a deal breaker once you're in a relationship, but generally convenience. Customer service, in language, hours of operation, and most importantly, geographic location is what's driving it.
comes to Mike.
Hi, Janis, Bowdler, National Council for Asset. Thank you so much for your presentation, and Daniel in particular, thank you so much for knocking off the double standard for low-income families who are routinely referred to as somehow being like a less sophisticated customer, which really drives me nuts in the conversation around financial education, because I've long said that, especially for those low-income immigrant families that are sending $500 a month back on poverty wages, they do more on nothing than most middle and upper income families do with their incomes. And you know, the breakouts on your research really challenge the morality question, as you put it, on bank relationships. And I'm wondering, really a twofold question, just to get both of your thoughts on then, to the extent that somebody can be well served in the AFS space, if we can consider them banked for, you know, the sort of what we consider banked, all the benefits that come with being banked. And then the second follow-up question to that is, what does that mean for graduation to more sophisticated financial products? That's what I'm concerned you might miss out on when you need to start building a credit history, for example, or those products that you here. So I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
No, I think great point, Janis, because you know, even when we talk about the prepaid card, for example, we see it as a pathway. And so how we can get people using services, how we can add features to it that we think are, again, more sophisticated. The savings feature, how I can save for today, is part of getting you there. I mean, if I can't think about my retirement savings, but I can think first of all about savings. Let's get you into that behavior. Let's get you to a product that serves that. And then let's think about how we can create opportunities to get you into more sophisticated. And so I think that there's a lack, actually, and I think there's opportunities for the marketplace to develop services around that and give these consumers there. We all know that they, as you said, realize that they should be doing these things. Maybe there are products and services there for them, and I think traditionally people haven't looked at this segment as an opportunity to create products and services around. But absolutely, I mean, we talk about the prepaid card at ARP as a pathway. That's why we look to make sure that it has savings features, and I think as we roll it out, that we're going to look at how we can build on perhaps other alternatives to that incorporate retirement savings and planning, and even looking at how, again, the family approach is how you're looking at it. Interesting point around remittances.
I think this is the great frontier, is how do we transition people from transacting to depository relationships, asset building, and ultimately credit building. For the most part, the AFS industry does not have the legal right or ability to add those depository products. They play games and do a little with the credit, with the payday loans, which, by the way, if you haven't figured out asset building and depository products, you probably shouldn't be getting into credit too deeply anyway. So the real question is, where is that handoff from people? I would make the argument that AFS providers can compete when they're doing a good job with banks, and sometimes do better than them on certain transactional activities around cashing checks, paying bills, sending money. But if they're unable ultimately to help those same people build deposits and create depository relationships, which they can't legally, they're not banks and they're not chartered, they're stuck. And then they're in a trapped business model where they have no incentive to graduate people into asset building and then ultimately building a credit record. So then the problem is, what's going to happen? Either the banks are going to push down in that transactional space, not doing a good job of it right now, and quite frankly in the current times are retrenching and going away from that more to the South segment. So there's a void in this sort of low income space of people who are transacting, who are making money, who are spending money, who are positive economic players. How do we get them to start saving and building accounts? And there's some neat models. I don't want to I think we're going to talk about hopefully a little later today, of banks or credit unions buying check cashing operations to provide a hybrid model. Maybe the banks will push down and be a little more responsible. But those transitionary products are what don't really exist in a vibrant way, and that's the gap in the market. That's the market imperfection right now.
We have 1 minute, so let me throw a quickie question at both panelists. We've heard about the obstacles from the consumer point of view, issues from the banking or the institution point of view. On balance, you've got 36 seconds. On balance, is it a personal problem or an institution problem? Take your case.
It takes a village, but it's an institution, so.
I think, you know, and Janis alluded to it, that we think these are savvy consumers, and we want to give them credit, and we want to meet them at their needs. So whether it's meeting them in their communities physically, whether it's meeting them with products and services, whether it's changing policies that need to change in order for institutions to do that, I mean, I think that's really where the solutions lie. I think also just, you know, the awareness of the providers and the policymakers to realize that there are gaps and that we can act to change that.
Olivia and Daniel, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We're going to come back at 10:30. The rest, I think everyone, when people were RSVP, I was like, Fernando's going to be there. Oh, I have to go to that panel. So Fernando, go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's a thrill, actually, to be here again on behalf of our president and the foundation. We thank you for joining us. I think you will agree from the first panel that we are onto something very big and very important. We have a distinguished panel that will be taking the next step. So what do we do about all this, or what is being done? And we're just waiting for our council member to walk in. But let me thank the first panel for their excellent presentation. And those of us that are from Los Angeles and love this city and its diversity, I was asking Dan to Lillian, who are you really in terms of your ethnic background? And only in Los Angeles could somebody say, I'm half Puerto Rican, half Armenian, and I'm married to a Chicana. That's tremendous. And Dan, where are you? And what would you call your offspring? Chico-Rican. Only in LA, because we have this incredible mix of cultures and ethnicities and languages. And we're so pleased that Los Angeles is one of the sites to begin to promote this very important issue. And the direction which gets us away from issues of poverty and victimization and exploitation to one where we build on the natural, sophisticated abilities of immigrant communities, minority communities, low-income communities to take control of their own financial destiny. And I really appreciated, I think it was Dan, your comments and Janis's comments, that we're not really talking about an unsophisticated group. When you think about the limited financial resources, but yet how they survive and raise their families and send money back to their families in other countries, they are not only sophisticated, but given the proper opportunities, they have tremendous potential to become an important part of the economic life of this city and community and be an important voice in the private sector. And I just have to share my own personal story. My mother, a single mother, raised 9 children on her own. And even though she had very limited income from welfare, at the end of the month, she always had enough dollars left over to take us to A&W and treat us to a root beer and a cheeseburger. My wife and I, who are professional, well compensated, making more money than in 1 year than she probably made in her lifetime, struggled to maintain our cash accounts, and I struggled to balance my check. And so I realized my mother was quite sophisticated in managing her limited funds, and I think that just speaks to the tremendous untapped potential. So it's wonderful that we can now provide leadership on this issue. Richard, I was buying time for us, so that you could come in quietly. And we are now here, and I will now move to our panel where we are going to identify and speak towards the solutions, whether in public policy or the private sector. I won't go through any detailed description of their backgrounds, but let me introduce him in first, and a good colleague and friend of mine, one of our esteemed council members, Richard Alarcon. I'm going to have you go first after I introduce everyone, because I imagine you have a busy schedule. And so busy schedule. Well, we'll assume that.
That's your way of getting it.
I don't exactly. I'm comfortable with our council member because I also work for him. I'm also a member of the Los Angeles Airport Commission, so we report to the Los Angeles City Council. But he's not just our council member, he's been our state assembly member, our state senator, one of the Latino and civic leaders in Los Angeles. We also have Janis Bowdler. Thank you for joining us with the National Council of La Raza and the Wealth Building Project. NCLR has also been a leader in promoting asset building, wealth creation in the Hispanic community. Welcome, Janis. We have Olivia to my right, Olivia Calderon, who's with the New America Foundation. They're California's legislative directors, both working here and in Sacramento. Welcome, Olivia. And then last but not least, we have Ernie Powell, who's the Senior Manager of Advocacy for AARP California out of Sacramento. So we have an all-star cast. So I'm going to first allow each of you to give roughly 5 to 10 minute overview of the issues that you want to present, and then I will pose a series of questions and involve the audience as well as we look towards this very important set of policy solutions. So Councilman Alarcon, great to have you with us, and if you could shed some light on these issues of financial security, the issues of banking and underbanking among our Latino immigrant and minority communities. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to all the organizers and sponsors for putting this together. I'm looking forward to reading this in Los Angeles. I know in the city, we kept talking about 300,000 unbanked in the city, and now I understand the county has 1 million. And that is lost opportunity. That is the American dream gone awry. And so I think that I would like to touch on two things. Number one, we've got to give the economy back to the people of the United States of America. When you're talking about the city of Los Angeles, you're talking about shifting from what essentially has become a third world underclass economy under the radar, and yet you have incredible wealth with financial institutions that frankly are doing quite well as well. And the second theme that I want to touch on is restoring responsible banking. And I believe that we're in a transition. Recent history has shown, particularly the foreclosure crisis, has brought to light the significant irresponsibility. And I'm not picking on banks per se. The American public have allowed this to occur. The systems of government have allowed this to occur. But it is not healthy for anybody. It's not healthy for the people. It's not healthy for banking institutions, in my estimation. It's not good for our overall economy. And so the second theme is we have to be more responsible as we move forward. We can't just go back to the way it was, because I don't know which period of time you would pick, but I just think we can do better than at any time in the past. And so that means we have to scrutinize financial transactions, we have to scrutinize banking institutions, we have to scrutinize things like bonding companies, the bond raters. I mean, they're just, I don't know, they do bond rating by hocus pocus, and it really doesn't make sense. So first of all, let's talk about, when I say giving the U.S. economy back, I want to talk about a few things that we've tried to do in my office to bring back that notion. I introduced one motion to create banking development districts in Los Angeles. New York has used this model, and the New America Foundation, in fact, has been very helpful with us in gathering the information necessary to promote the notion that in some parts of Los Angeles there aren't sufficient banking institutions, plenty of check cashing institutions, and so for every bank in Pacoima, there's probably 30 check cashing institutions in Pacoima. And that is not a secure way to operate your dollars. So we do need to develop more banking development districts, identify areas that do not have sufficient banking services and invest in them, and at the same time hold the line on check cashing institutions that are saturating most of these neighborhoods. Another one, we have one-stop centers in Los Angeles with our social service provision, and one of the things that we've actually tried to focus on is not just the services that we render, but how can we make people more knowledgeable about financial interests. When I used to teach in a nonprofit corporation, some of you might know it, Chicano Service Action Center, I used to teach financial literacy to young women between the ages of 14 and 21. I teach them how to get a loan, how to make a budget. I tell them, you want to party, but make sure it's in your budget. And so I think that with our social, we introduced something called One E-App. So you go in and it's connected to all, so it's connected to the welfare system, it's connected to DWP, it's going to connect, so if somebody of poverty comes in and fills out an application, they'll be connected to everything. But then it's also going to have, we're going to be announcing something called Hello Wallet. And Hello Wallet is essentially the kind of thing that I used to teach the young ladies at Chicano Service Action Center 30 years ago. If you're going to buy a car, these are some of your considerations. This is the kind of budget you should be looking at. If you're going to get a home loan, this is what you should do. What should you do about savings? It's going to tell you how to protect your wallet. I think my time is running short, so I'm going to touch on just one or two other things. Banking responsibility is my big push. We just got the National League of Cities to incorporate it in their mission statement to reform the Community Reinvestment Act. I believe that if the city of Los Angeles is going to spend literally $30 billion a year in investments, we're going to bank $30 billion, that we have a responsibility to ensure that the institutions wherein we are placing our deposits must be responsible to our community. So we've created and approved an ordinance that would require, I'm sorry, we haven't approved the ordinance. The ordinance is in final draft, but we'll come to the council to approve an ordinance that will allow the treasurer to measure the performance of the banks. How did they perform in the foreclosure crisis? How are they providing modified loans? Are they providing small business loans? So we will measure their performance in the community, and then if they want to sell our bonds, we'll let them sell them. If we were to place, $100 million in a bank, we will allow them to if they are good community players. So with that, Fernando, I'm going to let the panel go on, and I'll take the questions later.
Thank you, Richard, and we'll be asking you some questions after we get to the panelists. And I'd like to now ask Ms. Olivia Calderon if she can share her thoughts and observations on this issue.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you for AARP for convening this timely discussion. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm confident that this is going to be a series of conversations that we're going to have on this very important topic. Again, New America Foundation, and I am the legislative director in Sacramento, and we advance asset building policies and think about how can we help an individual build wealth over their lifetime. So what are these lifelong wealth building opportunities? And so with that, from thinking about children and advancing children's savings accounts so that every single child starts saving from the very start of life, whether it's looking at college savings and trying to figure out what the opportune time is to create an account that children could save for college, and thinking about how this account could be a learning tool that could be integrated into K-12 financial education so that kids are learning about money management know-how in a very concrete way, to thinking about how we help the most vulnerable among us, families on welfare, families that are participating in the TANF program in California, the CalWorks program, Welfare to Work, and how to make sure that this program really works for working families, and looking at how we reform the asset test. I was struck when Vivian Visaya was talking about the results in their study, and they found that among Latinos and African Americans, one of the major concerns is how their information is going to be used, and the misuse of their information is a major concern. And we hear that when it comes to families on CalWorks, right? That there's an asset test, that you can have more than $2,000 of assets to participate in the CalWorks program, which is ludicrous and counterproductive. We all know it to be true. And so at the state level have tried to do away with this silly test, and have successfully changed the laws to create savings exclusions for families to save in retirement accounts, in college savings accounts, or in an individual development account, an account that's set up for very specific asset building purposes. And so with that, we know that for families, it's a major concern that if they start building their savings, if they have a checking account or a savings account, that somehow their benefits are going to be taken away from them, right? Because they're violating some law out there. They don't even think about whether or not it's a 2,000 limit. All they know is that if they have savings, that the savings could count against them. And so this is something where we're trying to inform, educate, and also reform the asset test. But also thinking about families during their adult life when they're working. How do we expand and broaden retirement savings for California workers when we know that the private sector workers out there don't have a pension, don't have retirement savings at the workplace, that our small businesses would love to be able to offer something, but they can't afford it. It's too complicated, it's too convoluted. And the providers are really not out there marketing to small businesses. And so how can we creatively create a portable, an automatic way for folks to save for retirement? And these are kind of the initiatives that we've introduced time and time again, working with leaders like Councilman Richard Alarcon, and thrilled that the City of LA has stepped forward and taken the initiative to really lead the state in thinking creatively about how to leverage the bank on movement, partnering with credit unions and banks to help bank the unbanked and help them open starter accounts. But what about those communities that have nothing, that have no financial institutions, either a dearth of financial institutions or none at all? Like in Pixley, California, in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley, where we know that the closest bank is about 30 to 40 miles away. And so folks are banking at a grocery store. And I'm thrilled to be working with leaders like Councilman Alarcon, who here in the City of LA, we're confident that it's creating the momentum for us to take this and create a statewide program, because we know that it's not just a local problem or regional, but it's statewide. And so with that, I'm thrilled to be here and look forward to continue to delve deeper into these initiatives that we're advancing at the state level, and we'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to now ask Janis from NCLR if you could share your thoughts.
Speak with my hands too much. I need to lock this down. So thank you so much for having me. Janis, Bowdler, National Council of LARASA, which is the nation's largest Hispanic civil rights organization. For those of you who don't know, our headquarters is in DC, but we have an office here in LA, and I'm very pleased to be out here. In fact, as a Mexican-Irish woman from Cleveland, married to a Chilango from Texas, I'm feeling very comfortable here in LA.
Only in Los Angeles, right?
Yes, thank you very much. The other reason why I'm feeling really comfortable on this panel and with this discussion is because I thought the first session did a really great job of breaking down some of the frameworks that we normally use to talk about the unbanked and the underbanked. And I really commend you guys for that research. I thought it was really great. And I want to start my comments by picking up on one of those themes, which is around trust. And we hear this a lot, that one of the reasons why people don't go to banks or credit unions is because they don't trust those institutions. And I actually think that the reason why this is out there in a big way is because we ask people, do you trust banks? And they probably said no. But I don't think that that's actually what is going on. Sure, if you come from a country where there were a lot of bank failures or bank fraud, then you may not trust banks. Truthfully, I think we need to ask some questions about how banking institutions in our own country are measuring up against those, since we have bank failures in the news, we have hackers in the news, and we have a lot of frauds and scams and a foreclosure crisis on our hands that are eroding the credibility. But I think the bigger problem we have, rather than trust, is that there is not exactly a huge market competition for the segment that we're talking about. And so a real lack of outreach has allowed this distrust myth, I think, to really foster in unhealthy ways. And so what we need to talk about, as was prefaced in the earlier panel, is how do you create that outreach? How do you create the drive to push banks and credit unions into those lower income levels and get them to bank the unbanked? So one big problem with this is that, yes, you can be profitable while doing this, but you know what, you're going to be a lot more profitable if you're selling credit cards to rich people. So it really is a money game when it comes down to it. So I want to highlight just one policy solution at the national level, it was already alluded to this morning, is revisions that can happen in the Community Reinvestment Act. Right now, I'm not going to go into DC politics. anybody wants to talk about that afterwards, that's great. I don't know that legislation is really in the cards this year, but we have a lot of flexibility on the regulatory side. There's a lot of work that can be done to bring CRA into the 21st century and allow it to leverage greater basic banking for low-income families. And I want to put out one idea about how it can do that. So we've already talked about the ways in which banks are not doing a great job of going after that low-income segment. Well, can we get those bigger banks who are not as nimble, who are maybe not interested in the unbanked segment or don't have the market expertise to get to that segment, can we get them to invest in smaller, more nimble institutions that do have that expertise and allow those either deposits or PRIs or technical assistance count under CRA? A really good example of this, where I think this could really work, is around remittances. The idea that every bank out there is going to create a remittance product is neither likely and maybe not even smart. Some of them are going to do it and they're not going to do it well. But if we collaboration, I know amongst the for-profit banks, not always their favorite word, but if we can get some collaboration to make some investments into a couple of institutions that are really specializing in it, and then we get those institutions to be able to get into the nooks and crannies of markets that are overlooked, we'll be much more successful. I think this strategy is really important, especially for urban core and rural areas where there is not a lot of competition, again, for the business of these families. So I have a lot more ideas about exactly how we can make that work and what else we can do with CRA, but I will leave that for the Q&A.
Thank you. Ernie, if you can share your thoughts.
Right, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. It's great to see some good friends from LA and from the foundation. I am German, French, Scottish, born in Tokyo, relocated to Sacramento, and still love the Los Angeles Dodgers. And the perspective that I've been asked, I'm not sure if this is a compliment or not, but the perspective that I've been asked to share is from the older person's perspective. And I'm happy to do that because that's where I work. Let me talk about, I'm sorry? Yeah. Remember, all of you will get that mailing someday. The perspective that I want to share is and I don't want to get into national politics, but there's some things about aging in America that we know we've solved. Not solved, but we've made a significant dent in, and that is the whole concept of social insurance. Social Security is nothing less than a success. In 1935, when it passed, almost 40% of everybody over the age of 65 was poor. That poverty rate has dropped anywhere from, where you read it, 9 to 13%. And you can say the same thing for Medicare as well, that we've seen increased longevity rates, that aging in America is a lot different than it was half a century ago. The key part where this discussion comes in, when you look at that perspective, particularly for low-income seniors, is that Social Security and Medicare were never intended to be the sole source of your retirement security when you grow old. So these other features that we're talking about, whether they're products for people that are unbanked, or other ways in which we add a secure retirement living to people, particularly in an urban setting, are very, very key to fulfilling the dream, if you will, the dream of what retirement security is supposed to be about within a social insurance, if you will, system. So ARP has, through the years, supported many of these initiatives. We've supported, for example, better regulation of payday lenders. We fought hard on the predatory lending front, both at the national and state levels. So I just want to say that as the Director of Legislation for California, we will be working very hard in Sacramento on many of these issues, but I'm particularly enthused about the level of energy that I see in this room. I have been at hundreds of meetings in Los Angeles, but I've rarely seen the kind of policy focus and programmatic focus that I see emerging with the people we've hired from the foundation, with other people that we've brought into the Los Angeles mix. I'm very excited about that opportunity. I have 3.2 million members in California. 600,000 of those are in Los Angeles County alone. And so I think that the opportunity for this discussion, and here's what's interesting about today, and Fernando and I talked about this earlier. At this very moment, in cooperation with the SCAN Foundation, there's a sit-down meeting of all the long-term care providers in Sacramento, nursing homes and home supportive services, caregiving organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting that on both sides of our great state, we have this discussion. We're talking about, in a way, the economics of growing old, how to broaden the safety net and the promises of Social Security at the same time that we're talking about a very daunting problem as we face this budget deficit for long-term care and community-based care. I think what you see for AARP from a policy and from a grassroots point of view, and many of you know that I come from a grassroots organizing perspective, is a new day for us. So I just want to commit that these kinds of issues, these kinds of local urban issues are in the forefront of our policy intent, the energies we're going to use in the coming years, and the kind of resources we're going to commit. I'm excited to be here and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. And thank you each. And what I'd like to do is first ask each one of you in turn a question, give you a chance to respond, and then we will open it up. And we're doing well on time, and I know that you all have your ideas, your suggestions for how we respond, and so we'll be sure to make it an open dialogue. But working in the same order, if I may ask Councilman Alarcon, you've been a leader both at Sacramento and in Los Angeles on many of these issues, and you've given some examples of both the problems and how LA is trying to respond. And earlier we talked about how Los Angeles in many ways is kind of ground zero for one of the largest proportion of unbanked, underbanked populations. But LA is also moving ahead on these issues. My question, Councilman, how can Los Angeles be a national model for showing the way, especially given the tremendous diversity we have in this city and in this region, as well as the tremendous social challenges that we have to face?
Well, first of all, I think we are a national model, but not necessarily for the right things. When it comes to financial institutions and spreading our economy to all of our population, we're just not doing a good enough job. So what can you do? First of all, we have to incorporate in the bureaucracies that we control a mindset to reach out to these folks in a better way. And so with our community development department, we are engaging them, and they are offering many ideas as well, engaging them in the process of how do we empower the service recipients in the communities with skills, financial skills, economic skills, financial literacy skills, so that they are not dependent on the services that we render. Additionally, we are scrutinizing financial institutions. We just blocked a deal with, I believe it was Bank of America, Chase, and JP Morgan because of their performance on another transaction that we had that we were not pleased with how they treated us. They did not give us information that allowed us to understand whether or not we were getting a fair shake. And so we blocked a bond sale that they were going to do. So I think those are just two measures. We're also participating with the IRS. Most people don't know, and all the community-based organizations should know this. When I used to work in community-based organizations, and if I could give my clients cash, that would be the best thing I could do for them, quite frankly. So there is cash out there at the IRS. Part of the benefits that we got from the stimulus bill was financing of our earned income tax credit, and there's literally billions of dollars that are not being taken by. Imagine if billions of dollars were offered to the banks and they said, no, we don't want it. But literally millions of people in the United States and hundreds of thousands, or at least tens of thousands of people in Los Angeles have not taken advantage of the earned income tax credit. So one thing you can do is make sure your clients know that they should apply for it. So there are a lot of things that need to be done. In terms of being a leader, I'm hopeful. For example, the banking responsibility measure that I introduced is Boston is going to introduce it any day now. Philadelphia has had it since 1993. and numerous cities are now embarking. Now we got the National League of Cities passed a resolution that incorporated into their Community Investment Act reform resolution. So there's a lot of things we can do, but frankly, we're a long way from being a model to the nation when it comes to banking the unbanked. But frankly, we are not going to be successful if we don't figure it out. Can I just mention one other curiosity? Who is banking the check cashing institutions if not the banks? I mean, so they figured out how to make this market work. They just finance the check cashing institutions, and that's how they make the market.
If I may, just have one last question, Councilwoman. Tax season will be coming up right after the holidays. Any advice, suggestions you'd like to make about how our community should respond to the tax season coming up?
First of all, if you are a community-based organization, establish a VITA program, a voluntary income tax assistance program. I did this when I was at Cal State Northridge 30-some years ago, and it's still a great tool today. Community-based organizations can work with the IRS to establish a VITA program right in your institutions and serve your clients directly. Secondly, any client that you have, just as we're doing the one EAP process, and one of the checkoffs is going to be, do you have a checking account? Did you file for EITC? You should do that with your clients and make sure that they are filing. And by the way, tell your staff to apply for the earned income tax credit, because you'd be surprised. And I witnessed a couple that made zero money 2 years ago, and they received a check for $2,700. You should have seen the look on their face. They really needed it, and that's what it's there for. I mean, if we can invest trillions of dollars in banks, we can certainly accept billions of dollars for working class poor.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I do have to just add to these comments that with tax season coming up, AARP has a well-established system of tax aid volunteers that for pro bono, free of charge, will work with individuals, regardless of income, to help them prepare their tax returns. And they're all over the state of California, which enables them to avoid going to the very expensive, high-fee tax service agencies. And I'm just jumping ahead. Ernie, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that in terms of the AARP tax aid program.
I just want to second what you said. It's a very good program, and if any of you have places where you'd like them to come and do assist any of your clients, we can certainly make that available.
Which I'm proud to say is another wonderful service of the AARP Foundation.
Can I give my little spiel?
Please, this is the right time.
That we did 2.6 million tax returns last year for free, before police pulled it. Plus, the federal government, $2.95 per person compared to $125 each month.
There you go.
Joanne, you'd be pleased to know that we have an AARP tax aid site at St. Barnabas Senior Services.
Terrific.
And so it will be available again this year to Westlake.
We are not allowed to say send your clients away from H&R Block to one of our tax aid programs. That would not be fair, so I'm not going to say that. Olivia, if I may move to you, Ms. Calderon. You've spent many years in Sacramento on various committees and with a number of legislatures, including our beloved Jenny Oropesa, who's no longer with us. And so you've seen at the state level both the demographic trends where minorities are now the majority, Latinos the largest population. But I think we also know, and recent reports bring them up, that Hispanics now have the highest life expectancy compared to other groups. Just think about that. For those of us Latinos, we have a greater probability of living longer than African Americans, whites, and most Asian and Pacific Islander groups. So, Olivia, how do we prepare for that longevity to ensure that we're not poor in our old age? And in particular, given that Latinos have the lowest rates of pension and retirement coverage compared to those groups. So how might we begin to promote savings, investing, or being part of a retirement program? Any thoughts you might have at the state level with these?
Yes, but before I even respond to that question, I just want to bring everyone's attention to a report left on the table that we published at the beginning of this year, and I believe that it's out there. I think we still have some copies left, but on the EITC, I think Los Angeles has been a model, and this Councilman Alarcon had the most fascinating informational hearing where he had folks from New York City come and just share with us what they've been doing to try to get folks to tap into the EITC. And what we found here in Los Angeles and statewide is that California leaves $1.2 billion untapped. 800,000 Californians fail to claim their EITC. And that's money that we know is spent in local communities. It's economic engine. It trickles back up to the general fund, and so we need to do a better job. And what's fascinating to me is that in our report, we found exactly what was in the AARP's report, that a lot of families, they know money's out there, but are also fearful of tapping into the EITC. Because the Obama administration, he raised the maximum to $5,657 that a family could be eligible for. $5,657, and it's retroactive. So if a family didn't claim it this tax season or 2 tax seasons prior, they could go home potentially with a windfall of $15,000. And so if you have, again, a family who's also participating in other means-tested programs, and these means-tested programs have a cap of $2,000, then these families are not going to save that $5,657, right? They're probably going to spend it down or spend all of it. So again, all of these programs and all of that are intended to financially empower families are intimately intertwined, and we need to make sure that they work for working families, and that a lot of these rules are not counterproductive and counterintuitive. And when it comes to retirement savings, we know that here in California, across the country, pensions are disappearing, and folks don't have access to retirement savings at the workplace. And here in California, about 6 million workers don't have access to the way most of us save best, which is through payroll deduction. Out of sight, out of mind, automatic. And so what we've been trying to do in partnership with AARP, both here in California and nationally, is create an automatic way for workers to start saving, creating an auto individual retirement account, an auto IRA, that workers would automatically be enrolled in if they don't have access to workplace retirement, and think that this is a very exciting and innovative way to start folks, to make it easier for folks to save. But want to make very, very clear that an IRA in no way is going to help an individual retire in security in their golden years. That they also need to have personal savings and other assets that they build over their lifetime. But think that creating an automatic way for folks to start saving is a first step, and it's an important step, and that the state of California can play a very, very important role by maybe looking at something like the college savings plan, the 529 scholarship program that California instituted about 10 years ago. We have college savings plan that California families could save into, and that maybe by taking a plan that's worked in the Treasurer's office for some time now, that maybe we could broaden it and create an automatic way for folks to save in an IRA. But that we also should start thinking about the beginning of life. And I go back to the children's savings and how important that is. I'll tell you, when I joined the New America Foundation, I joined New America. I was working for now late Senator Jenny Oropeza, but I heard about this idea. The idea that if we're going to create a culture of savers and investors, if we want to close the wealth gap in this country, the racial and gender wealth gap, then we need to start thinking big. We need to be visionary, and we need to start thinking about the start of life. That when kids are in school and they're learning about all sorts of things, that we should be teaching them about money management in a very concrete and real way. And so we're so excited that San Francisco, because of Treasurer Cisneros' foresight, and Gavin Newsom, the mayor now, Lieutenant Governor-elect, were able to create the first in the nation kindergarten to college savings initiative. And so in San Francisco, seated by the city, every single kindergartner is going to start with a college savings account that's going to be integrated into K-12 financial education. And the reason I'm excited is because I know that this is going to be the model that's going to create the momentum for us, again, to make this happen for every child in California and for every American child. That we need to think that big, and that it is very, very possible when we all collaborate and work together. Which is why I'm, again, excited to be here, because the problems that we're talking about today are just too big for one entity to tackle them alone, right? In California, we have an asset poverty rate of 30%. 30%, what does that mean? That California households, right, they do not have enough savings or assets to be able to live at the poverty line if they were to lose their job tomorrow or already lost it. They don't have enough assets. And we know that people are living paycheck to paycheck. But it doesn't matter how poor you are, the data's out there, poor people can and do save, and we have to just create these opportunities for folks to do so. And so with that, I'd just like to bring everyone's attention to this auto IRA idea that would potentially be introduced shortly, and think that it's going to be one of those great innovative ideas that can have life in Sacramento in light of our $25.8 billion deficit.
Great, thank you. And I neglected to mention your most impressive accomplishment. She's also a UCLA graduate. Janis, you've been involved in national policy issues, and in particular, you've certainly been a leader in wealth building activities. But with the National Council of La Raza, which is arguably perhaps one of our most influential Hispanic advocacy groups, NCLR is involved not just in their well-known immigrant advocacy, but also economic and social policy. I wanted to ask you if you could just share some thoughts in terms of a federal perspective of the pending compromise on taxes that is being discussed in the Congress right now. How might that affect low-income communities and the populations we are concerned with?
So the tax debate seems to bring out a level of intensity like no other. And I think perspectives have really been all over the map. From our perspective, extending unemployment benefits was critical, and the tax benefits for middle-class families are a very critical part of that compromise. So while a lot of people are going to be talking about those benefits for the richest among us, for Latinos that have had double-digit unemployment rates now for well over a year, and don't quote me on the number, but well over half of the unemployed are unemployed for longer than 6 months. Those unemployment benefits are a lifeline. They're critically important to us right now. And if I could just add a layer on top of that, for families struggling to save their home, having projectable income and knowing that those unemployment benefits are coming are critical for them to be able to qualify for a loan modification. Not that we're doing fabulous on that front, but those are critical pieces to keeping our families going through what is one of the worst recessions of our time. So we hope that comes along speedily. It's supposed to be on the Senate floor soon, if it's not today. So.
If I may ask you just one follow-up question on that, again, given your wealth of national federal experience. Part of this tax policy compromise includes, I believe, 1 year of a reduction in the payroll tax by 2 points. What would that mean in terms of low-income communities?
Well, I think that the thinking there again, much the same as EITC, that's real money that, first of all, that families really need, but that they're going to spend in their local communities, and it's going to be an economic engine. So I think this was alluded to in the earlier session, but what we're seeing is that families are relying on credit cards to make daily expenses. So these are not families that are, trying to keep up with their neighbors. They're trying to put food on the table. They're using their credit cards to do that. Right now, these families need all the help that they can get.
Great, thank you. Richard, I think, and Ernie would like to add on to those comments.
I actually just want to add a perspective. When I was in Sacramento as a state senator, we used to have this conversation, and there'd be a few of us that would be promoting the increase the tax on the top 2%. And the most difficult challenge we had was the public itself. With a 60% requirement for passage, we had to, we were challenged to get it passed. And so we did a survey. And what we found in the survey is that 19% of the people think they're in the top 2%. And a huge additional chunk of folks wanted to be in the top 2% and thought they were going to be there someday. Well, the top 2% are just people of incredible wealth, and the vast majority of people will never get there. But we could never get to the 66% threshold for passage because of the perception of the people that they were doing better than they actually were financially. So it's a very, I understand President Obama, I'm sure, has access to those kinds of polls, and And I believe that he was pressured by the reality that not just from the Republican Party, but from the reality that most folks think that taxing the wealthy, not most folks, but a large chunk of Americans believe that taxing the wealthy somehow is going to invade their turf.
My quick comment,
Ernie?
Thank you. My quick comment on this is, a lot of economists I read say that payroll tax forgiveness is any moment a good stimulus for the economy, and it certainly helps working people. Let me just, as an ARP advocate for a moment, state a danger zone here. The danger zone is that the most untrue argument, yet the most effective argument that people who want to privatize Social Security make is that Social Security is going to grow. It's not. You folks know, we all know that it's not. It's solvent all the way to 2041, and that's on very conservative growth rates. So certainly the payroll tax forgiveness is going to put money in people's pockets. But we need to be very vigilant about that dynamic, because a year from now, we don't want to see it. We don't want to see that added to the argument that the privatizers make that say that Social Security is going to be in crisis again. What happens in the Obama, if the deal goes through, is it's it'll cost Social Security $140 billion. Social Security has $1 trillion surplus. That's because of what happened in the early 80s with some legislation that Ronald Reagan signed and that Tip O'Neill and Alan Greenspan helped to fashion. So I just want to add that cautionary note to all of us as activists. That's all.
We're going to move towards our Q&A now to engage the audience. And there are two questions I'm going to ask individuals to respond to during the question and answer. I'm going to ask Olivia to shed a little more light on asset protection and predatory lending. And Ernie, if at some point in the question and answer, I'm going to also ask you to, this is kind of a loaded question, to answer the rhetorical question of why should low-income and minority and Hispanic communities, as they get older, join AARP? And but let me ask you to just hold that a moment so we can begin to get in a dialogue, and then if you all and Janis and Richard could also weigh in on any other things you want to raise. Okay, who would like to go first? This has been a stimulating discussion. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm not sure I need a mic, but okay. I'm Bob Kraft, and I'm a volunteer on the ARP Policy Council. So naturally, it's a policy one question. But Janis, you brought up the CRA and how it can be modified to push the 6 biggest banks in this country, which control 80% of the assets, to help the 7,800 who are in the communities to and control the other 20% that's really serve closer to the public. And Councilman Alarcon, you brought up this interesting concept of scoring banks and responsibility. And I wonder, do you think, the question is, can that be combined productively to actually grade banks? You know, we know the big banks, and this has been mentioned, actually have investments in AFS institutions, which we really don't approve of, and they make their money in that. And they don't use their name because they protect their big name and make a smaller name and get CRA credits for that. Do you think this can be modified with some sort of combination, would have to be, with some sort of responsibility to make sure that they got credits for investing in the right things?
Let me start at the top with the idea of scoring. I mean, you're supposed to get scored as an institution bound by CRA. The problem is that we've had rampant grade inflation, and research has shown that the service test, which is usually where they account for the basic banking pieces, is actually where the inflation happens. And so for banks who are right on the cusp of outstanding and satisfactory, research shows that they'll get an extra bump in their service tests, and that will help keep them in the outstanding rating. We have a huge problem with grade inflation. So the kind of metrics that the councilman was talking about are critically important to actually implementing CRA in the way that it was envisioned. So the metrics and the accountability, you really have to start there to make it work. So that's the first thing. my idea is I mean, we can talk about how to add more data to the service test, but the community development test has been one that has been used in the community development field to advance CDFIs, for example, and there are very positive relationships that have come out of that, deposits and technical assistance again. So what I'm wondering is, can we take those same kind of metrics, those same kind of deposits, really the same thing we do with CDFIs, but apply it to basic banking? And that community development test is more geared to the kinds of metrics and accountability that we would need to make sure that, first of all, it's actually answering a community need. Plenty of banks have really fabulous products on their shelves that aren't that useful because that's not what the community needs. And second, that it's used in a positive wealth-building manner. And we can actually watch that over time. So again, it's not just the presence of a product or of a basic banking tool, but it's the uptake, it's the longevity of its use in the community, and that it's done in a collaborative way. Those are things that we can do right now under current authority in the regulatory space. We don't need any legislation to do that.
First of all, the notion of grading and the